Being teenagers, my friends and I struggled to tickle our nerves. We made up all kinds of creepy stuff. I mean, telling horror stories in the tent, sneaking off to the cemetery after midnight, and so on. We explored all the abandoned parts of my hometown. That was a fun time. I was attracted to that kind of activity until I was old enough to do it. Until one incident, our last adventure. I'm married now, but I've never told this story to my wife. In general, I try not to recover this case in my memory. That's my unspoken rule. I don't feel I can ever share it. Even with my closest people, I want madly to forget that day, or rather night. What a pity the past can't be changed. It was a hot summer. I was young, happy, in love. The perfect formula for a happy youth. Obviously, I didn't want to study, just like any other teenager. I wasn't planning on going to college. My father promised to get me a job as a handyman for a while. I had no specific goal in life at the time. Some of my peers already knew that they would be biologists. Some dream of becoming hairdressers. A couple of the boys were looking for work at the sea. My best friend Andrew was going to work at the service station, while my girlfriend Julie dreamt of becoming a tourist agent. Once, my godfather invited me to visit him for the summer in the small village where he lived. I didn't miss the opportunity to drag Julie and Andrew along, knowing that I would die of boredom without them. Fortunately, the godfather's house allowed for such pleasure. We set up in one spacious room with a bunk bed and a sofa. Nature bloomed and smelled all around. The godfather's yard had a wide chicken coop. Cows were grazing in the meadows in the neighborhood, while turkeys and geese wandered in the streets. It was so beautiful. It was a novelty for a accustomed to exclusively urban views boy. My friends and I walked around the whole village several times. We stumbled upon an aggressive goat that tried to gore us. Then we found an abandoned house with a roof overgrown with ivy. We swam at the local lake, which reminded me more of a swamp. There were frogs and thickets of reeds. So we explored the village all week. We were wandering in all interesting places, getting acquainted with not numerous youth. Jules and I went to the lake in the evenings to stay alone. It was nice. However, we soon got fed up with it. That's when we first heard the story about the abandoned church. It was outside the village, in a field near a forest. Locals didn't go there. They were afraid. Rumors abounded, right up to the fact that during a service one of the priests went crazy and killed all the visitors, after which the church was closed. We became interested in this story, and no wonder, as we checked all the gruesome stories in our hometown. From the abandoned mental hospital to the ghost of Central Park, we made the decision without thinking twice. We had to go. There was nothing else to do, and the mundane entertainment was boring. The spooky, abandoned church was another matter. The godfather didn't control us at all. He understood that we were young and adventurous. It wasn't the first time we'd gone out for the night, but I didn't warn him that day, saying that we were going to the neighbor's house to spend the night with our new local friend. It wasn't entirely a lie. We had slept over at John's once, and today, if we got back from church too early, we were going to visit him again. The church looked like something out of a photograph or a horror movie. Stone, beaten, and shabby. The rotten door barely stood on its hinges. The spires faded and squandered their former shape. The silhouette of the building had its former image, but now it was hard to call it a house of God.
Nah, the abandoned asylum looked worse,
Andrew snorted.
This is just a local legend, a lair for the local drunks. Well, we'll go in and out, and if there's nothing interesting, then we'll go straight to John's.
I shrugged. Personally, I was a little creeped out by the church. It was unlike anything we had wandered into our hometown. It was like an alien church, spreading its paws out in the middle of the wasteland. darkening it with its presence. I realized that Jules was uncomfortable too. She squeezed my hand tighter, not taking her eyes off the half-destroyed building. It seemed to me that she even shook a little.
Shall we go?
I decided to take the first step. Despite his feigned boldness, Andrew didn't want to lead the way.
There is no God inside.
It was written on the archway under which we passed. Julie squeezed my hand even harder. We were told that the church was ancient, but we couldn't find any information about it online and relied only on word of mouth from the locals. The floor was creaky, badly rotten in places. The church wasn't very spacious. Jules and I went to the altar. Andrew explored the main temple space. We were silent, looking at faded icons, a broken statue, the crucifix of Jesus. We hadn't found anything awful yet, but even the air in the church felt strange. It wasn't like the air in the usual abandoned places. If I closed my eyes and concentrated, it was as if I could feel it. The aroma of dampness, stench, and some incomprehensible acrid chemistry suffocated me every time I breathed in. I guess if I'd actually smelled it, I would have had a panic attack. We should have turned around and walked away, but of course, we didn't. My girlfriend and I were about to go back when suddenly we heard a crash and a scream. Andrew's scream. Goosebumps ran over our skin when we rushed to him. As it turned out, Andrew had fallen through a big hole in the floor. There was a corridor under the church into which our friend had fallen. Fortunately, he hadn't broken anything. We went down after him, amazed that there were some secret passages. Of course, we were interested.
Maybe we don't go there? May we leave?
Julia was the first to protest.
Are you kidding me? Let's see what the hell is going on here.
Andrew started to deny it. He did look a little frustrated. I would have agreed with Julie, but I didn't want to give in to Andrew.
Let's check.
I agreed.
Johnny didn't tell me there was something under the church.
So we went down a corridor that looked like a dungeon. I was sick to my stomach at the sight of all those views. There were some strange oval lamps hanging on the walls, not working of course. We carried flashlights, which helped me see at least something in the total darkness. We walked in silence. The picture took everyone's breath away. We didn't want to talk. I used my flashlight to snatch the bars out of the darkness, and I was dumbfounded. We came to a place where there were strong, lattice-type cells, rusty and creepy. Andrew pulled the nearest door, but it was locked. It was empty, except for some dirty rags lying in the corner. Andrew cursed. I had no decent words for it either. We were all delighted and horrified by our discovery. A real underground prison, and one under the church. It certainly had something to do with the closing of the temple.
Why don't we get out of here?
Julie was frightened out of her wits. Andrew went pale too, but we couldn't leave. Not now. I wanted to go further, to see what else these corridors were hiding.
We'll leave soon.
I stroked Julie's head, and we moved on. The cells were empty, with only rags lying in places, probably clothes. I couldn't make it out anymore. There was a fork in our path ahead. We turned right. Andrew remembered the way well, so we weren't afraid to get lost. His photographic memory was excellent. We often relied on it before. A bit later, we approached a heavy metal door with a muddy window. It looked like it was locked, but it wasn't. Andrew pulled the handle and opened it with a creak. An even stronger chemical smell wafted up to our noses. We coughed and our eyes watered. When we recovered from the attack and looked around, we realized that this was a laboratory room. A large iron table, instruments, strange old equipment, and a cabinet filled with flasks of some kind of liquid. Now we were definitely shocked. The conclusion came pretty quickly. There's an abandoned laboratory under the church, and the cages were probably chambers where they used to keep test subjects. Animals? Or maybe even people. I swallowed. Julie was breathing very hard, panting. I was frightened and grabbed her under my arm to keep her from falling.
Julie? Jules? What's wrong with you?
It was like she didn't hear me. She went white as a sheet. Andrew froze in a mute stupor in front of me. Suddenly, my girlfriend shrieked wildly, squealed, broke free of my grip, and rushed to the exit. Unfortunately, she took a wrong turn.
Julie! Julie!
I shouted and rushed after her. We were running through an even more confusing labyrinth of passages. The flashlight flickered and went out. When it flickered again, Julie was gone. I was standing in the middle of the corridor all alone. Andrew was somewhere behind. There was a metal cage next to me, and it reeked of something rotten. I was confused.
Jules! Andrew!
I shouted, but there was no answer, only silence. I didn't even know how long these corridors could be, how many levels they have. I became really scared. My heart was beating like mad. A chill froze my skin. I couldn't remember the way back, and my friends didn't respond. I shined a light into the cage next to me, looking at what was smelling out of it. A human skull in the corner of the cage horrified me even harder. I covered my mouth with my hand so I wouldn't scream. It became difficult to breathe. I retreated a few steps, continuing to stare at the skull. I felt nauseous and shaky. It was uncomfortable, and I could barely stand on my feet.
Andrew! Julie!
I shouted even louder. No one responded. Again, there was only oppressive silence and a nauseating chemical smell. I tried to pull myself together. If I ran down the corridor, as Julie had done, nobody would ever find me. I walked in the opposite direction, hoping to get out of the maze. Shadows haunted me. Empty cells flashed all around. A door slid out of the light. It was similar to the last one, but of a different shade. This one was brown, with a thick layer of rust. I pulled the handle, but it was locked. I was about to move on when I heard strange noises. They came from behind that brown door. First, a slight rumbling noise, and then a scraping sound, like nails on metal.
Who's there? Julie? Andrew?
I tried to look through the small window, but it was too cloudy. No one responded. And then there was another rumble, much louder, shriller. I even jumped away. Goosebumps ran down my skin.
Who's at the door?
There was another rustling, scraping sound, and then it was gone. Silence had returned to the corridors.
Hello? Hello?
I shouted, but no one responded. The room behind the door seemed to be empty, and whatever was in it had already gone. I pulled the handle a couple more times, but the door wouldn't budge. I couldn't kick it open, and it was for the better. Sixth sense suggested that it was certainly not Julie or Andrew. I continued walking forward. Similar corridors replaced each other. I couldn't tell which part of the underground labyrinth I was in. There was nothing that I would call a familiar landmark for sure. There wasn't even the door behind which we had discovered the laboratory, and where we had separated. I was tired of walking, so I sat under the wall, catching my breath. I felt nauseous, dizzy, and my arrhythmia had reached its climax. My palms were shaking and sweating. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no one would hear me. Suddenly, there was another rumbling sound. My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced around.
Julie? Andrew?
I asked timidly in the surrounding darkness, shining the flashlight. It blinked. What a bad timing. The charge was running low, so the light faded, and then I saw something. The silhouette in the distance of the corridor was somewhat human-like, but also strikingly different. Thin arms and legs seemed to be too long. A naked, bald body and eerie black eyes looked unnatural. Was it an animal or human? No, more of a cross between a mutant. I froze, huddled against the wall, staring at the creature. The faint beam of the lantern still allowed to do it. I felt every nerve tense, while the beast was standing in front of me, unmoving, as if it were examining me. Before I could comprehend anything, the mutant snapped out of its place and ran at me on all fours like an animal. Then I rushed away in a panic. The creature roared and made unintelligible sounds, running, clawing at the floor. The disgusting smell tripled in intensity. I realized it was coming from the creature. I ran as fast as possible, grabbing the cold walls with my hands, almost breaking my legs on the downs and bumps of the uneven road. Running as fast as I could, without looking back, I heard the creature roar behind me. It crashed into the arches and slid its paws around the curves. I couldn't shout. Fear clamped down on my vocal cords. I felt as if I could hear my heartbeat louder than the screeching of the vile creature. The surge of adrenaline made me run. For a moment, it seemed that the beast was very close, breathing in my back and trying to hit me from behind its barbed paw. I heard its claws hit the cage and snag on the bars. A loud, eerie growl erupted from its mouth, hitting my ears.
Please, 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 I want to get away. I want to live. That's the only thing I dream about.
I lost track of time when I reached the place that was filled with dim light from above. The sounds behind me subsided. The creature had fallen behind. I'd lost my flashlight somewhere along the way while I was running away.
What? Where did the light come from?
Those were my first thoughts, and then I realized that I was in the same place, under the hole in the church, at the very pit where Andrew had fallen. And then I may have been a little cowardly, but there were no more thoughts in my head, only instincts. And the first of those instincts, the instinct for self-preservation, told me to get out. I climbed out of the pit, staggering. I waddled to the exit of the church. I walked 10 paces away and fell on the grass. Then I started crying. I felt so good and so bad at the same time. Julie and Andrew left behind. I understood that, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. And in despair, I went to the village to call for help. Julie and Andrew's bodies were never found. Neither was the creature that chased me through the underground labyrinths. The creature that still haunts me in my nightmares. They were gone. Sometime after what had happened, one more detail came to my attention. When I shone the flashlight on the creature, as it stood motionless in front of me, its body, especially its mouth, was smeared with something. Only now do I realize that it was a blood stain. Perhaps one day I will find someone to whom I will tell, without evasion or subterfuge, what happened on that quiet moonlit night. One day, I will tell what nightmares haunt me at night, and what creepy creature I draw over and over in my notebook. One day, someone may know how I lost my best friend and my girlfriend forever. I left them alone with the result of the experiments of a creepy underground laboratory. One day, or maybe I'll take that story to my grave. Who knows?